Sure.
What is either your favorite Ask a Mexican question or your favorite story that you've done?
My favorite Ask a Mexican, all of them. I mean, I still can't believe that people actually ask me questions about Mexicans. That they send them in to me. I'll give you a short story. I'll give you a short story of the column. So the column started out as a joke. What happened during all of 2004, we were doing a small column called Burning Bush, where we would publish conservative criticism of George W. Bush. Well, that column was going to end eventually, after the election, whether Bush won or lost. So we had a hole to fill, which we never have that nowadays, which really depresses me. But what are you going to do? So my editor at the time, he said, "Okay, I have to proceed this with this." He was driving down Main Street in the city of Santa Ana in Orange County, which is one of the most Mexican cities in the United States. So he sees this billboard. He comes all excited to me. He's like, oh, I just saw this billboard of, I think he's a Mexican DJ, and he's wearing a Viking helmet, and his eyes are crossed. I think his name's Pilin. Have you ever heard of a Pilin before? I'm like, well, it says Piolín. And then Piolín, for those of you who don't know, he is the most listened to DJ in the United States. Bigger audience than Rush Limbaugh. So this guy's huge. He comes out on, oh gosh, 93. Sorry, I'm thinking in Spanish right now. So, no, 101.9. 101.9 locally in Los Angeles. So huge DJ, but for the purposes of us, when he came to the United States for the first time, he ended up in Orange County. So I told Will Swain, Will, you're stupid. Not because you're a white guy and all white people are supposed to know everything about Mexicans, but because you're the editor of an all-weekly in Orange County. We're supposed to know these stories. You're supposed to know these, the understory, the undercurrent. You're supposed to know the stories that the Orange County Register doesn't know. And he was nice. He didn't fire me. Instead, he said, why don't we do a satirical column, a joke column where you pretend to be an advice columnist about Mexicans to people like me in Orange County, dumb gabachos who don't know anything about Mexicans. And I told him I didn't want to do it just because I didn't think anybody would care about the column idea. But he insisted, and again, we had a hole to fill, so I'm like, okay, what could be the dumbest question that I could think that people could ask me about Mexicans? I'm like, I got it. And so I went back and I asked myself, dear Mexican, why do Mexicans call white people gringos? And because he had asked me that before, among other things. I was the only person of color on staff, and so I had to be the expert on Vietnamese, Muslim, Mexicans. We don't have any African Americans, so none of that. So he would always ask me that. I thought that was the dumbest question ever. So I'm like, okay, I'll answer it. Mexicans will call gringos, gringos. Only gringos call gringos, gringos, and Mexicans call gringos, gabachos. Of course, it's a satirical answer because I contradicted myself 3 times in my answer. So we published it, and we put a caricature, like the Bandito caricature of a Mexican, big fat guy with a mustache. You know who he is.
Gold teeth.
Yes, no gold teeth, just a mustache.
All right.
Sombrero, though. You forgot the sombrero.
Sorry.
Gold teeth, that's right. Gold tooth. We published it, and there you go. Then, so we knew then we were going to get a reaction because whenever you talk, especially those of you who still work in journalism, whenever you publish a story about immigration, people go insane. Oh, those Mexicans, blah, blah, blah. So we knew that was going to happen. What we didn't expect, though, was for people to start sending in questions about Mexicans. Even though it's called Ask a Mexican, I didn't expect that. I go back to Will, I'm like, people are asking me questions about Mexicans, what the hell do I do? He said, let's just do the column until there's no more questions to be answered. And, well, here I am, 2008, they never stopped. They never stopped, and so now the column comes out in 39 newspapers across the country and all that. So with that backstory, what's my favorite question? Geez, all of them. They're all, some of them are so vile and racist, some of them are so silly and wonderful. Like, I'll give you one of my favorite ones. Somebody once asked me, it's like, why are Mexicans always so damn happy? He's like, every time I see them, they're laughing, whether they're like in 100-degree weather picking strawberries, or sitting in the bus stop. Why are they always so damn happy? And of course, my response is like, of course we have to be happy. Our lives are so miserable. So, anything you can think about Mexicans, I've had it asked, and I've answered it, or I've yet to answer it. It really is amazing. And in doing the column, I mean, I know we have our issues with immigration right now, but the vast majority of the questions that I get are really people just honestly curious. Like, hey, why, or one of the most asked questions, why does so much damn Mexican music sound like either oompa music or polkas? There's a history behind it. It's because German and Czech immigrants came to Mexico, and so we picked up the music, and frankly, it's your guys' loss for giving up on the Lawrence Welk show. We love it. We dance to it all the time. It's wonderful. So that's my favorite column. Favorite story? Geez. Well, one thing that I do for the weekly that I think more newspapers should do is what's called historical journalism, where you just dig up long-lost stories from the past that have just been forgotten. In Orange County, there's so many of them, because in Orange County, we have this nice little narrative that everything is all orange groves and Disneyland and beautiful. Well, that's a bunch of bull. And that's a bunch of bull, and so I've been doing all these stories for a long time. So I'll actually, instead of a story, I'll give you my favorite column. So although I do Ask a Mexican, my favorite column is, it's called Profiles in Orange County Pioneers Who Are Klan Members. Yes, exactly. So the brief story. So I've been covering Orange County history forever, so I know all the dirty secrets, and I always knew, well, I'll backtrack. So there's one story about Orange County that everyone knows, that the Klan used to rule Anaheim and Orange County during the 1920s, but then they got kicked out. So Orange County historians like to tell that story, like, oh, this is, Orange County, we would not stand by the Klan. We would kick them out, blah, blah, blah. And so I knew that story, and I knew it was more complex than that, but I also knew that there was a membership roster. There was a membership roster that was leaked to the press, of course, and then once it got published, that destroyed the Klan once and for all. At least that's how the story went. But no one could find the list. So I was able to find it. It was hidden under God knows how many papers at the Anaheim Public Library. And then I started reading it, I'm like, oh, this is going to be fun. Because without even doing any research, okay, that guy has a street named after him. That guy has a park named after him. He used to be the mayor. He used to be, there's a plaque after him, blah, blah, blah. So I got the list. This was February of last year. And so every week since then, once a week, here's this guy, this is what he did, and he was Klan. This guy, Klan. Boom, boom. There's a humongous list now, and this list is 2,000 people long. This column will go on forever. And of course, Orange County being Orange County, they're like, oh, well, just because you were in the Ku Klux Klan doesn't mean you were racist. Oh, you should see the comments on it. People make the most long-winded excuses for their ancestors. Oh, and I just got somebody, nowadays with the internet, you have to do SEO optimization and all that. So I always make sure that the URL has the name of this person, where they're from. So I guess somebody was trying to look up their grandpa, and they found out that he was a Klan member. Oh. I know, so they're like, well, how do you know he was a Klan member? I'm going to sue you. I'm like, well, first and foremost, you can't defame the dead, so, shove your lawsuit. Secondly, this list, it exists. And so she also tried to make excuses. Then she turned out to be a Mexican hater herself. So I'm like, oh, I'm glad that racism still goes under, I think it was the Sechrist generation. I don't know who they were. So I love doing that story because it's just, I'm stating the truth. I'm stating the truth, and it's making people feel uncomfortable. And more importantly, it's entertaining as hell.
What?
So I think this gentleman has a question here.
Actually, a very interesting question.
Ask your question, Sean.
Why are we making fun of Mexicans?
We're not making fun of Mexicans at all. I'm a Mexican myself. I'm not making fun of them at all.
It's called
But-
parody.
Yeah,
Parody.
what happens with Ask a Mexican is I do the column, but to expose people's racism against Mexicans. And sometimes when you do that, you have to do it in a way which shows that the person who's making fun of the Mexicans, they're the dumb ones, not the Mexicans themselves. Yeah.
Okay.
No.
Good question. Good question,
But
Sean.
it is a good question because it's a very controversial question, or it's a very controversial column to this day. Actually, one guy once got suspended from work for racism and sexual harassment because he took my column, to his office. So really short story in that one. So a guy one time, I want to say 2006, goes down to Albuquerque, picks up a copy of the Albuquerque Alibi, which carries my column, goes back to where he lives in Eugene, Oregon. Eugene. Eugene goes to Oregon, he works as an orderly at a hospital, so takes my column, shows it to his Mexican coworker, he thinks it's funny, he shows it to her white coworker, his white coworker, she thinks it's funny, and on and on and on. Finally, he gets called in the following day to HR. They tell him, you're suspended from work for racism and sexual harassment for 5 days without pay. You can't appeal your suspension. here's the sad part. It was hardly the most offensive thing I ever wrote. And this is why it shocked me, because, okay, so he got dinged for the sexual harassment because a Mexican woman, she asked me, I'm married to a white guy, and he's trying to learn Spanish, so he watches CNN en Español. But every time he tunes into CNN en Español, there's chickens clucking in the background. So why are chickens clucking in the background on CNN en Español? And I told her, ma'am, your husband tuned into the foreign channel. There are no chickens clucking on CNN en Español ever. But from there, because if you haven't been able to tell already, I'm a huge nerd, so I went into this whole history of the use of chickens in American ethnic humor, or just American humor. You know, we always use chickens to make fun of the owners as being kind of dumb and backwards. The best recent example, of course, is Borat. You'll remember at the very beginning of Borat, he has a suitcase, he opens it up, and a chicken starts running around the subway. Everyone's laughing because we're like, you're so backwards, Borat. You know, you don't have chickens on the subway anymore. That just isn't. That's just not how it goes. So I made that point. And then the point, of course, with Mexicans, you hear this on conservative radio all the time. Whenever there's a story about immigration, you hear chickens clucking in the background, roosters crowing because they're trying to say, oh, Mexicans are backwards. You know, because of that. Of course, if it's hipsters having chickens in the background, they get front page stories in New York Times. Go figure that out. So I made that point, then I said something else, which I always forget, and then I made my conclusion. I said, ultimately, Mexican men treat women the same way they treat chickens, as purveyors of breasts, eggs, and little else. Now, if I had said, very simple, Mexican men are macho, no one would have blinked. No one, not a single person. But because I tried to make a joke out of it, that's the sexual harassment part. And then the racist question, the racist part came from another question which my friend wrote. And the question is very simple. He's like, dear Mexican, and he's Irish, by the way, so, dear Mexican, why do Spicks and Mix get along so well? Is it because we're both drunk, fornicating, degenerate Catholics? And I said, yes. But then I did a very thorough history. The Irish were the Mexicans of the United States before the Mexicans. You see how the press treated the Irish. They would bash them for supposedly always being in gangs, for having big families, for always being drunk, for being poor, for living 15 to a house, for their funny English. I mean, gosh, look at Thomas Nast. Thomas Nast would draw the Irish as apes. Mexicans, of course, they have their own stereotypes, but they were never depicted as apes. So I did that really thorough, concise history and said, yes, that's why we get along. We're, brothers from another madre. But still, people didn't get that. So no, the column is controversial, but, I'll stand by my record of having done it. I've gotten so many awards from all these nice organizations like the National Hispanic Media Coalition, the California Latino Legislative Caucus, and blah, 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 blah. But thank you for your question. Okay, bravo. Oh, wow, here comes the questions.
Okay, so how do you? I'm white, so I got a whole different. I'm
Really?
a whole different set of rules. But how do you How do you convey the humor? I'm sure that no matter what, you're going to get nailed, right? So how do you convey the humor in a way that the smart people get it, and the maybe not so smart are the ones who go, screw you, you're an idiot.
I just do the column based on how I find it to be entertaining. I mean, I don't have this set, okay, I have to answer it this way, that way, or that way. It's hard to do. Satire, you're walking a really fine tightrope, and you could easily fall off, and, it's a thin line between satire and just falling flat on your face and coming off as a doofus. How do I do it? I answer the question. Depending on the question, I'll answer it with stats and, history and whatever. I try to be funny in my own way. The most important thing with satire is you have to play the fool to make the bigger point about yourself. That's really easy for me to do, play the fool. And you just go with it. But most importantly, I only write the column for myself. I don't write it for a particular community. I don't write it to please anyone other than myself. I know what I'm doing with the column, and I just have to follow it. I've been doing it for 8 years, and I've been happy with how I do it, and people have been happy for the most part. It used to be more controversial back in the days, but now I think people have generally accepted it for what it is, and they really do enjoy it. And it's, it's nice. I mean, I would still do it regardless of what people thought of it until the day I got bored of it, which that's never going to happen because, one day, and especially with newspapers contracting, like papers have dropped my column because they just can't run it anymore. So one day it's only going to be the OC Weekly. I'm just going to turn it into a column about etymology and food. I don't mind. Those are my favorite subjects anyway. So when I answer it, depending on the question, I just have to answer it and hope that people laugh and understand it. And most importantly, though, the way I answer the question, only a fool would ever think that this column perpetuates racism, because people actually, that's been a charge lodged against me. Oh, your column perpetuates racism and you give racists a justification to be racist. Well, the next person who's racist or who's going to commit a racist act because of my column is going to be the first person. The only group that's been uniform with their opinion of the column has been, people, actual racists, and they despise the column because they see right through the sarcasm and satire, and they know what the column is, which is a direct assault on their idiocies. Yeah, that's how it goes. So you had a question.
Yes, it was about social media.
Uh-huh.
So you, like us, remember a time before there was social media.
Yes.
Who do you follow on Twitter, and who do you think is doing social media right?
I don't really follow. I'm more of a Facebook person.
Oh, okay.
I don't really follow people on Twitter. I mean, who do I follow on Twitter? Well, my friends, Andy Borowitz is hilarious on Twitter. Oh my God, he's the most I never liked him when he was on Day to Day on NPR. I always found him too precious and smarmy. But on Twitter, he's magnificent. So when I read Twitter, I try to read comedians. Norm Macdonald, except all he ever does is tweet about golf. Like, it's really freaking annoying. Patton Oswalt is funny. Sarah Silverman, of course, is old. Yeah, that was funny. So on Twitter, I mean, it's incredibly useful because it's instantaneous, and I guess I should follow other media people to see what's going on with them, but
so
that's
who do you
not
like on Facebook then? Like, who are you like?
Well, on Facebook, just whoever friended me, really.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no. I mean, I in that sense, I'm very old school in that I have the media organizations and people that I follow, but I actually go to their website and look at it. So locally here in Southern California, I always go to LA Observe. LA Observe all the time. I follow him on Twitter too, but I'm not looking at it all the time. The people who I think do social media right, well, it's the upstarts, people like Gawker and Vice and Y'all and those people. Sometimes, I don't think their journalism is always the best. Like, I know one thing that just came around that's all buzzy is what's it called? Hipster racism, or there was some article, but it was a terrible article. People were like, "Oh yeah, it's so good." I'm like, dude, us, who work in this, we've known this for a decade, and it's only getting traction right now because it's Gawker who wrote it, and that's an indictment of how shallow people's minds are, and they don't know their history. But that said, Gawker's a genius at being able to have that branding that's able to get them all those hits and all that buzz attention to them. And that's the most important thing. You always have to be on top of it. You cannot rest. You have to be on call 24/7. Some of us can do it, others can't. And those of you who can't, or those people who can't, they should drop out. They should go to the money and be PR people. I'm just losing my music editor because of that. Thanks a lot. It's him. He stole her from me, damn it. Okay, a couple more questions, then we'll go back to eating.